Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Israel finally finds a taker for its soon-to-expire vaccine stocks. Meanwhile, international investigators call for official probes into Iranian President-Elect Ibrahim Raisi. And finally, Israel unveiling its first all-women tank unit. ILTV taking a deeper look at the role of women in the military and the opposition that they face. Now, some good news on the coronavirus front. Israel finally reaching a trade agreement preventing the waste of well over 500,000 soon-to-expire vaccines. Just a few weeks after the Palestinian Authority reneged on their agreements and rejected coronavirus vaccines from Israel, Israel finding a viable solution for the doses, which are set to expire at the end of July before Israel can put them to proper use.
범정부 백신 도입 TF는 이번 달 7월 이스라엘 정부로부터 화이자 백신 70만 회분을 공급받고 오는 9월에서 11월까지 순차적으로 반환하는 백신 교환 협약을 오늘자로 체결하였습니다.
South Korea agreeing to accept the terms that the Palestinians flipped on, a win-win scenario where Seoul receives vaccines sooner than expected and in return provides the same amount to Jerusalem at a later time. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett explaining that the deal, quote, plugs the holes as well as ensures that Israel maintains proper vaccine stocks, end quote. And this as Jerusalem particularly concerned about the latest spike in infections. Israel confirming over 500 new cases overnight for the first time since March, half of whom are school children. Then 50,000 people are now also in quarantine. Bennett, for his part, repeating pleas for everyone over age 12 to vaccinate as soon as possible. As for concerns about the evolving variants that have made or will likely make their way around the world eventually, health experts discussing the need for booster shots, a third dose of coronavirus vaccines to shore up citizens' defenses. Israeli health ministry officials and other leaders in the medical community, however, are arguing that a third shot would only be necessary for certain individuals with compromised immune systems, if at all. And this regardless of the vaccine's drop in efficacy against new variants like the Delta variant. Meantime, Prime Minister Bennett ordering the health ministry to open 2 new medical studies that will later inform COVID policy. One study testing verified COVID patients who've been vaccinated in order to determine the vaccine's efficacy and rate at which it wears off among different medical demographics. And the other, a study of cellular immunity amongst vaxxed individuals through the use of serological testing, which checks for the number of COVID antibodies present. In other news, UN human rights investigator on Iran, Javaid Rihman, making major headlines on Monday. Rihman stating that in his many years in the position, he's gathered tons of evidence and testimony against the Ayatollah regime in Iran, including on continued suppression and alleged abuses by Tehran today. In fact, Rihman even suggests that he has proof of deliberate manipulations ahead of the recent Iranian presidential elections. But then speaking of the election itself, Rihman calling on the UN to finally, officially open an independent investigation into Ibrahim Raisi, the president-elect. He's also known as the hangman of Tehran, suspected of major involvement in hundreds of extrajudicial killings back in 1988.
I think it is time, and it's very important now that Mr. Raisi is the president, that we start investigating what happened in 1988 and the role of individuals. I think you asked about the evidence, mass graves. Again, we have made communications to the Islamic Republic of Iran because we have concerns that there is, again, a policy to actually destroy, or there may be some activity to destroy evidence of mass graves.
Joining me to discuss is Iran expert and geopolitical advisor with the Reut Group, Alexander Grinberg. Thank you so much for being with us, Alexander. Now, what happened back in 1988?
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you for having me. What happened in '88? It was a mass execution of thousands of political prisoners upon the order of the founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini. and Raisi was just a cog in this murderous system. And it was the execution of political prisoners is a well-known fact that can be easily checked, unlike the wording of Reuters depicting this event as an allegation. It's not an allegation, it's a well-known fact.
So who was Raisi then? Because you mentioned him as a cog in the wheel, but now it's coming to light that he may have had a much more prominent role in the killings.
I wouldn't put otherwise. He was a head of judiciary, he was an attorney general or an equivalent post in Iran. Today he's a president, but the president in Iran in general does not wield real power. It means that the supreme guide, Ali Khamenei, remains the ultimate decision maker and the policy maker. It will be Khamenei that will take ultimate decision whether to continue nuclear negotiations with the US or not. And Raisi has nothing to do with that, because president in Iran is only a head of the executive power. He carries out the policy approved by the leader and nothing more. Now, however, the whole issue, in my humble opinion, is that the removal of the issue of lifting the sanctions from Raisi and the leader can become a serious obstacle for the continuation of the nuclear talks with the US, because the US is ready to lift all the sanctions imposed by the Trump administration, whereas the ultimate Iranian demand is the removal of all the sanctions, including the sanctions on the supreme leader and Raisi. But the Biden administration, I think, cannot remove the sanctions from the killer of Tehran, even though they're symbolic, without an exorbitant price tag, politically.
So now let's assume that an investigation actually happens and it finds Raisi or even much of Tehran guilty. What then? What punishments could be levied? Would any what recourse, if any, could be offered to the survivors and to victims' families?
I fear that no recourse can be offered to the survivors and to the victims, because historically, US or West imposed sanctions have never worked on any regime. All the issue here is symbolic measures that are important, but all of that, I repeat, that all of that has to do with the core issue of nuclear negotiations.
All right, Alexander Grinberg, thank you so much for sharing all these details with us.
Thank you.
Moving on, Prime Minister Bennett's government put to the test late Monday night with a parliament vote on the renewing of the controversial citizenship and family reunification laws. The opposition, headed by former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, choosing politics over supposed security.
סמי אבו שחאדה, נגד. נפתלי בנט, בעד.
Likud members chanting shame at the new premier after the government failed to renew the law instated in 2003 because of the Second Intifada. The opposition leaders making their political statements through a night-long filibuster, arguing that without their right-wing support, Bennett's values would flounder in his left-wing government. And Bennett, for his part, less than impressed, saying certain issues have no room for politics.
יש נקודות שבהם בכל זאת, גם באופוזיציה, צריך לגלות אחריות לאומית. אני אומר לחבריי באופוזיציה, יש דברים שלא משחקים איתם. ביטחון המדינה הוא קו אדום, והמדינה צריכה שליטה על מי נכנס אליה ומי מתאזרח בה. הכנסת אלפי פלסטינים ואזרוח שלהם ופגיעה בביטחון המדינה בשביל עוד איזה רבע נקודה פוליטית, זה פשוט לא הדבר הנכון לעשות.
Now for some history in the making. Israel announcing that its first all-female tank crew in the IDF, which includes a female commander, will be stationed on the Egyptian border, and this among several recent changes to the IDF in the name of gender equality. But not everyone is so excited. The unit is coming as part of a larger pilot to introduce women to more combat-heavy and artillery or armored-related regiments, and the pilot has long been meeting with heavy opposition. In fact, in 2020, an investigation was even launched into whether the first trial's results had been distorted to make it seem like more of a failure than it was. And a new pilot has since been launched, scheduled to conclude in 2022. So what does the future of women in the IDF look like? Here to discuss is Lieutenant General retired Orit Adato, the former commissioner of the Israel Prison Service, former head of the Women's Corps in the IDF, and member of the Forum Dvora, the Women in Security and Foreign Affairs nonprofit NGO.
Long enough.
Long enough. Lieutenant General, I've been waiting long enough. Thank you so much for coming here and speaking with us.
Thank you for having me here.
So let's begin. What do you know about the allegations, first of all, to taint the original pilot program?
Well, I'm not sure that there are really allegations for that. I would tell you that it's a process. And 20 years ago, we began, about 21 years ago, we began, then I was the head of the Women's Corps, in first combat positions for women. The first one was pilot course by the Supreme Court, and then the naval, and then the artillery, and the it was now it calls, it was anti-aircraft, but nowadays it's the all the systems that protect Israel from the air, and many other professions, but it was, just the beginning. And it was obvious that with the time it will be enhanced and developed, and some progress will come from that. The issue of the armory was not that days relevant yet. Nowadays it is. The decision of the military was to bring up teams of women together in a tank, because they realized that putting men and women at the same tank when you are looking for many hours at the same place and very small and close, this is not the right way to deal with it. So they have done some pilot, but the pilot had some, I would say, challenges.
Sure.
First of all, now they have decided, and they have done the right thing, about height and weight, minimum height and minimum weight.
Right.
Because women usually are smaller than men. That's fact. Right. Usually, not always, but usually. So that was some of the things that they have changed in the second pilot. Also the training, also, the way of strengthening their minds and abilities. Even though at the first one, there were women who went through a tank commander course, but they didn't let them perform their duty.
So we've made a ton of progress, and you've mentioned now one argument, or you could say opposition, but not quite. An argument for reform, but not necessarily against women in these corps per se. It's really just to make sure that it's the right. Okay,
that's my position. I know that there are other positions, of course, against it.
So that brings me to some of the opposition, and I kind of want to get your reaction on different points of opposition. In one point, United Torah Judaism MK Uri Maklev is warning against women serving in the IDF at all, saying that it's not human nature for them to do so. Now, this is a minority opinion, with only about 11% of Israelis thinking that women should fully abstain from the military. How do you respond?
I think it's old-fashioned, really old-fashioned. It's something that is relevant for the ultra-Orthodox. It's their choice. The law enabled them not to join the military. But that's something that is very minority of the population, and I think it's less relevant than the other oppositions that we already have, like saying that it will jeopardize cohesion in the units. It will jeopardize the ability and the readiness of the combat units, which is not the right thing to say.
Is there any evidence to support these allegations?
No, there are not evidence. They are just expressing their beliefs. And you can find among them some high-ranking officers reserved, as well as you can find more high-ranking officers reserved and active that say, no, we need them. And I want to bring to the table another issue, which is we've just heard, I think 2 days ago, about the numbers of the recruiting people to the military, the new recruits to the military. And we have heard also that there was a decision to withdraw from the decision to shorten the length of the duration of the service of men from 32 months, I think, to 28 months.
Sure.
Why? Because there are some gaps. And we cannot, as Israel as a whole and the IDF in particular, we cannot let ourselves not to fully utilize our human resource. So there is a need for that also. You cannot ignore that. And women are more and more interested in acting in combat position, in influential positions. It's a different generation, you know.
This is the change that you're not really going to stop.
Change. You cannot reverse it.
All right. Lieutenant General Orit Adato, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights.
Thank you. You're welcome.
All right, now it's been a week of final celebrations for Israeli President Rivlin, who ends his tenure as the Jewish state's 10th president tomorrow, Wednesday, July 7. The outgoing president's likeness then finally added to the series at the President's Garden in Jerusalem. ILTV's Rivlin reporting.
In honor of Israeli President Rivlin's 7-year term coming to a close, his statue unveiling taking place yesterday in the president's residential garden. And the bronze statue of the outgoing president is the proud work of Israeli sculptor Sigalit Landau, quote, a special artist with international recognition, according to Rivlin. Of course, nearly Den and Den are not the same. Rivlin continuing in his duties until the final moments of his tenure, including the presenting of one of Israel's top defense prizes at a ceremony with top defense officials. The 4 prize winners being representatives from various classified projects that are advancing Israel's security, from handling the country's intelligence to the Air Force, cybersecurity, and new technological capabilities. And Rivlin, for his part, thanking the team's individuals by acknowledging that, quote, the person behind the system is the foundation and the most important thing, without which the most high-tech developments wouldn't be able to defend us. Then likewise, earlier in the week, Rivlin hosting yet another ceremony, the 47th Annual Awards of the President's Prize for Volunteerism. During the event, the outgoing president celebrating volunteers from different backgrounds, including Jews, Druze, members of the Ethiopian community, and Arabs, all of whom are seen as paramount in contributing to Israel's resilience. In the president's thank you speech to the volunteers, Rivlin expressing joy at having the honor to continuously host such an event that stands for social solidarity. Rivlin saying, quote, you represent the beautiful Israel in that each gives of themselves for the other, because we are responsible for each other.
אז עלו והצליחו, ותודה רבה לכם. מותר לנשיא לומר בשם העם כולו, בעיקר בימים האחרונים לכהונתו. טוב לחזור אליכם, תאמינו לי.
And finally, later that day, Rivlin also addressing his last ever Project 929 Bible Circle commemoration, a meeting dear to his heart which he has regularly held throughout his presidency.
Now, for many of us, a little blue box has always been proudly placed in our living rooms, on counters at local restaurants, barbershops, and of course, supermarkets. I'm talking about the Jewish National Fund USA's famous blue box, or pushki, which through its donations has supported the planting of over 260 million trees in Israel since 1901. But that's far from all, because while making the desert bloom is often the first thing that comes to mind when thinking of JNF USA, today the organization has evolved into a billion-dollar philanthropy behind development in Israel, including attracting over 800,000 new residents to Israel's frontier communities in the Negev and the Galilee regions. We're here to explain more and all about what the JNF USA is up to. We're joined by JNF USA's National President, Dr. Sol Leiserbrem. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so my first question is, we're excited to have you in the studio with us today, but I have to ask, when you were growing up, did you have an idea of the effect that little blue box, all those little sense going into that would have?
No, not at all. I mean, I knew that it would plant trees, and I got a certificate for my bar mitzvah.
That's very nice.
But I had no idea, although later on I learned more about it, and I understand that our trees were sort of like the first soldiers of Israel, sort of protecting the land. So, but it certainly has grown from there.
All right, so where has it grown? What is JNF USA achieving today?
It's a, as you said, $1 billion philanthropic organization. It's never been done in Jewish philanthropy before. And we just don't build projects in Israel, we build vision. And it's a whole ecosystem. So we want to move, as you said, people to the periphery, to the north, to the Galilee, to the Negev, 800,000 people.
What might be one of the achievements that you're most proud of?
Well, there's a lot, but I'll give you an example. In Beersheba, so we're building a $350 million campus in Beersheba. So it's a campus that will be housing essentially 3 different groups of people, all living and working together. One is our Alexander Muss High School in Israel, which is for mainly U.S. students who come to Israel for a semester or more to study. We currently have our facilities outside of Tel Aviv, but we're outgrowing it. We're at 1,500 students a year, and we're going to 5,000 students a year. So we need a second campus that'll be a part of this Beersheba a campus, as well as the JNF Institute of Technology, where graduates from universities in the U.S. can come, live on campus, not in dorms, but in little apartments, and we'll help them get internships in high tech and cybersecurity. And the third portion of this campus will be for Zionism, to help teach Zionism from people around the world.
We'll try and get people to maybe come here and stay here long term.
We hope.
Ideally. All right, so I know that you're based in San Diego. What brings you to Israel this time around?
Now we're here to review and organize our first national conference in Israel. Every year JNF USA has a conference, but we always held them in cities in the U.S. This is our first conference that we're going to hold in Israel.
So what exactly is this conference about? What are you going to be discussing there or doing there? And I'm assuming it's in Tel Aviv, or where is it going to be?
Well, it's in Tel Aviv only for moments, meaning that we'll be housed in the hotels in Tel Aviv, but this is a conference on wheels. So we'll be traveling throughout the north and the south. We'll be seeing the various projects and visions that we're creating. So we'll go to Masada. There'll be over 500 people with us. Going to the top of Masada, we'll be dedicating a Torah. Wow. So it's going to be a very different type of a conference.
That's incredible. All right, well, with Masada, just make sure you go first thing in the morning. It is very, very hot out there.
It'll be October. Hopefully it won't be too bad.
Okay, that's already better. All right, well, so far I just want to mention that we encourage everybody to go and register, check out more about this conference at jnf.org/NC, and we will put that up on screen.
Right, NC stands for National Conference.
National Conference, perfect. All right, so jnf.org/NC, and again, we'll put that on screen. All right, so I know that from everything we've just talked about, it's so exciting. I know so many people are about to come to Israel with JNF USA's programs, and of course for the conference in October. Dr. Lizabram, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.26 shekels to the American dollar and 2.64 shekels to the Canadian dollar. Finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well. Thank you so much for watching.